Hi, this is the Teacher Education Program for Africa. My name is Alusine Barrie. Welcome to this session on designing your own questions or learning activities using Bloom's Taxonomy. In the previous session, we talked about how to design learning outcomes using Bloom's Taxonomy. If you don't know where we are, please go back into my channel and look through the various videos so you can see where we've come from. Questioning is very, very important. Okay, as teachers, whatever we do, we are always assessing learning, right? And of course, there are various forms of assessment. We can do assessments for learning, which questioning is part of. Normally during class time, we ask all sorts of questions to test whether or not our children are getting the knowledge, or whether or not we are hitting the various objectives of our lessons. We can also do assessments of learning, which are like at the end of, say, maybe at the end of term exams you give, all those things are to assess what children have learned. The easiest way to see the difference here is in this quote for the day, where we say, when the cook tastes the soup, that's formative assessment. Okay, so we have formative assessment. So like this is like the ongoing form of assessment, like questions you ask in class. But when the customer tastes the soup, that's formative assessment. Say, for example, when you send a report card to a parent, that's formative assessment. Okay, so just keep that in mind. That's not our focus for this session. Just to prep your mind that questioning is a central part of assessment, like forms of any whether it's formative assessment or summative assessment, we are always using questions. Okay, this session is focused on some 4 key standards in the professional standards for teachers in Sierra Leone, and this is very similar to others in other countries, including other even European countries. Okay, so the first domain, the domain of knowledge, it helps us to develop, to know how to teach our subject. So that's the fourth standard, standard 4, and standard 6, which helps us to know how to assess learners. Okay, so through this session, we are going to learn how to teach our subject, because not just the subject matter, but it's also how you teach it. Designing your questions is very important in that vein, and knowing how to assess learners is also important in that area. So the first domain of professional knowledge for teachers. And in terms of professional practice, this session will help us to be able to know how to actually plan learning activities or learning programs. Okay, you might go into a school or any learning institution, you might be a teacher or lecturer, you have to be able to know how to design learning programs or learning activities. And finally, you also have to be able to actually assess, not just to know how to assess, but you have to be able to assess learning. Okay, so we'll move on now. Let's just go through quickly. Here I have a set of questions that I have put. So, like I said, by the end, by the outcome, what I want to achieve by the end of this session is that you will be able to utilize question stems to design questions or learning activities to assess learning outcomes. Okay, so that is my own objective. This is my own learning outcome for this session, and the learning activities I have designed to see whether or not these outcomes have been achieved are these 4 questions. Okay, so keep these in mind. I will attach them in the video description. Make sure you follow them up, and do not forget to send me an email if you need help reviewing your responses, the answers. Okay, all right, let's go back to the to designing our own questions. Now, when you see past exam questions, like for example here, these are the ones I was telling you in the earlier videos that I collated. So this is, for example, chemistry, right? So you can see this question here is about defining a base according to Arrhenius concept, right? So this is basic remembering. This is a concept children learn in their chemistry. But now the final question here, you can see they say write a balanced equation to represent the reaction between blah 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 blah. Okay, this goes for 8 marks. Right? So as you can see here, this is more about applying something they've learned. You might have learned how to balance a chemical equation, right? So now you're going to apply that knowledge to be able to balance the equations between these 2 reactions. I don't know what that is. And then for Roman 3, you are asked to identify the substances in these electrolytes. Okay, you are actually to identify them. Is this a strong electrolyte? Is this a non-electrolyte? Is it a weak electrolyte? Right? So this involves some analyzing. Right? Children will be able to analyze and look at the various elements in the substances and tell whether or not these are weak, non, or strong electrolytes. Okay, so this just to tell you, because some teachers will say, ah, no, chemistry, no, I am a science teacher, so these sort of things are not important. It's extremely useful. Okay, so as you can see this, and also some questions here that are for like English language, everything. I'll also put some of these in the video description so you can follow up with them. Okay, so now let's spend the final half of this just seeing. So key things you want to focus on here is to make sure you plan your questions beforehand. Okay, and as you are planning your questions beforehand, make sure you include higher level thinking questions. Okay, don't just put like tell, define, list, name. No, go to higher level questions. Create, invent, predict something. Ask your children to design something new. Right, ask them to judge, ask them to make arguments, ask them to weigh, ask them to criticize, ask them to apply what they have learned to solve a particular problem. Okay, so all of these things are important. As you can see in your own assessment for this session, I included something where you have to apply your learning. So that's higher level thinking. Okay, now so please make sure you plan your questions beforehand. Right, and when you ask your questions, if you ensure you use higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy, you ask questions that encourage higher level thinking. Okay, the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy are focused on what the learner can do with what they have learned. Okay, it's not just I teach you how to define a noun and I ask you what is a noun. Okay, now I give you sentences. I give you a paragraph and ask you to identify the nouns in there. Okay, I ask you to write 5 sentences that each of them should have at least 2 nouns. Here, it goes beyond what the child knows, but now it goes towards what the child can do with what you have taught them. So this should be our focus as much as possible. Okay, and when you're asking your questions, make sure you include everyone. Don't just ask questions and then the children respond to you, the teacher. Okay, make sure when you ask your questions, children can answer, and then ask another child to respond and say, okay, what do you think about Mary's answer to this question? Mary said, okay, this group said this. What do this other group think? Right? So do these things not just to have a conversation between you, the teacher, and a child or a group of children, but between the children themselves. Okay? All right. So make sure you include everyone in the class. Don't just select a few kids who will always speak up. All right. And finally, just on the general tips, give children time to think. Okay, give them time to think. Maybe say I institute 3 seconds. When I ask you a question, I want everyone should think, and I count to 10 before anyone can give me an answer. So, because not all children can think at the same pace. So when you give them time to think, you give the chance to all children to be able to participate in your lessons. Okay, we'll move on into in the second part of this session to see how we can actually use uh, um, these question stems in order to design our learning activities. There is a link in the video for you to be able to download this and use it in your own lesson. Okay, thank you.